Have you ever felt lonely while being loved? Not alone in the room, but alone in the connection. That question matters because loving an avoidant partner doesn't break you loudly. It breaks you quietly, slowly, from the inside. You don't wake up one day and say, "I'm hurt." You wake up confused. You replay moments. You question your tone, your needs, your worth. You wonder why love felt so close, yet so unreachable. And if you stay until the end of this video, you'll gain something most people never do after this kind of relationship. You'll finally understand why it hurt the way it did, not emotionally, psychologically. And that understanding is the first real step toward healing. Loving an avoidant partner creates an invisible wound. There are no clear fights to point to, no obvious betrayal, no dramatic ending, just a growing sense of emotional starvation. They didn't always push you away. That's the hardest part. Sometimes they were warm, present, connected. Those moments felt real, deep, hopeful. And then distance, silence, withdrawal. That back and forth is not random. It conditions the brain. Human psychology reacts strongly to uncertainty. When affection is inconsistent, the brain doesn't relax. It becomes alert, focused, obsessive. You weren't attached because you were weak. You were attached because your nervous system was activated. Your brain kept asking one question over and over. How do I get back to the version of them that loved me? That question becomes a trap. You start trying harder, speaking softer, asking less. You adjust your behavior, not because you want to, but because you believe connection depends on it. And slowly, without noticing, you abandon yourself. This is where the invisible wound forms, not from what they did, but from what you stopped doing. You stopped expressing needs. You stopped trusting your instincts. You stopped expecting consistency. The human brain is wired for safety through connection. When love feels unstable, the body interprets it as danger. Your heart races, your thoughts loop, your sleep suffers, your self-esteem erodes. You think you're overthinking, but you're actually responding to emotional unpredictability. Avoidant partners often avoid emotions, not people. They disconnect when closeness feels overwhelming. But to the one who loves them, that distance feels personal. The silence feels like rejection. The withdrawal feels like punishment. And because there is no clear explanation, your mind fills in the blanks. This must be my fault. I'm asking for too much. If I was better, they'd stay. This is how the wound deepens. Psychologically, the brain seeks closure, but avoidant relationships rarely offer it. There are no final answers, just half conversations, mixed signals, unfinished emotional sentences. So your mind keeps the door open, waiting, hoping, analyzing. That waiting is exhausting. And here's the part most people don't realize. The pain you feel now is not only about losing them. It's about losing your sense of emotional safety. You trusted. You opened up. You leaned in. And instead of stability, you learned vigilance. Your body learned to stay ready, ready for distance, ready for disappointment, ready to be alone even when someone is technically there. That is trauma. Not dramatic trauma, relational trauma. It happens when love teaches your nervous system that closeness equals uncertainty. So if you're feeling heavy, if your chest feels tight, if your mind keeps revisiting the past, that doesn't mean you're broken. It means your system is trying to protect you from feeling that pain again. You didn't imagine the connection. You didn't exaggerate the distance. You didn't fail at love. You experienced a bond that never fully landed. And the hardest loss is not the person. It's the version of yourself who believed love would feel safe there. But here's the shift, and this matters deeply. You are not here to diagnose them. You are here to understand yourself, because healing doesn't begin by blaming. It begins by naming the wound. And once you can name it, you can stop carrying shame that was never yours. Stay with this process, because in the next part, you'll see why this pain lingers even after the relationship ends, and how your brain is still holding on to a pattern that can be gently, powerfully released. This is not the end of your capacity to love. This is the beginning of your capacity to love without losing yourself. The invisible wound doesn't fade just because the relationship ends. In many cases, it grows louder afterward. That confuses people. You expect relief. Instead, you feel emptiness mixed with longing. This happens for a reason. What you're feeling is not just emotional pain. It is neurological attachment still firing without a source. The bond you formed was shaped by unpredictability, and unpredictability leaves a deep mark on the human mind. The brain does not attach strongest to what feels good. It attaches strongest to what feels uncertain. When affection comes and goes, the brain releases dopamine in spikes, not steady waves. Spikes. Those spikes teach the mind to chase, to scan, to wait for the next moment of closeness. This is the same system behind habits that are hard to break, not because they are healthy, but because they are inconsistent. You weren't addicted to the person. You were conditioned by the pattern. Each time connection disappeared, your brain searched for meaning. It replayed memories. It rewrote conversations. It looked for mistakes. That mental effort created emotional investment. The more effort the brain puts into something, the harder it is to let go. This is why walking away felt like cutting off oxygen. Not because love was real in a stable way, but because your nervous system learned to associate closeness with survival. You weren't loved consistently. You were activated consistently. And activation feels intense. Intensity feels meaningful. But intensity is not the same as intimacy. Here's where the damage becomes personal. To maintain connection, you adapted, not consciously, instinctively. You minimized your feelings. You delayed conversations. You waited for better timing. You learned to read moods instead of expressing needs. Over time, your internal voice grew quieter. Psychologically, this creates self-abandonment. When the mind believes safety depends on staying connected, it sacrifices authenticity. You didn't stop wanting closeness. You stopped believing you were allowed to ask for it. This is why the hurt feels so deep. You weren't just rejected. You were trained to disappear. And when the relationship ended, that version of you didn't automatically return. The brain kept the rules it learned. Don't ask too much. Don't rock the boat. Don't expect consistency. Even in absence, those rules remain active. This is why you may still feel anxious, why calm moments feel unfamiliar, why your thoughts drift back to someone who couldn't meet you emotionally. Your system hasn't learned yet that it's safe to rest. Avoidant dynamics create a false belief. If I'm patient enough, I'll finally be chosen. That belief keeps hope alive long after evidence disappears. Hope becomes a coping mechanism, not because it's logical, but because it protects against grief. Letting go would mean accepting a painful truth, that love alone cannot build emotional availability, and that truth threatens the identity you formed inside the relationship. You didn't just lose them, you lost the role you were playing, the one who waited, the one who understood, the one who tried. The brain resists identity loss more than emotional loss, so it replays, it revisits, it imagines different endings, not to torture you, but to keep the familiar alive. Here's the shift that changes everything. Healing does not begin with forcing detachment. It begins with understanding why attachment formed. Once you see that the bond was built through imbalance, the shame loosens. You stop asking, "Why am I still stuck?" and start realizing, My system is unwinding. Nothing about this means you are incapable of healthy love. It means you adapted to an environment where emotional access was limited. Adaptation is intelligence, not weakness. Your pain is proof that you are wired for connection, for presence, for emotional honesty. The discomfort you feel now is your system recalibrating, learning that closeness does not need to be earned through silence or patience. And this stage matters, because once you understand the mechanism, you stop personalizing the outcome. You stop confusing chemistry with compatibility. You stop mistaking longing for love. You stop calling inconsistency passion. This clarity is not cold. It is freeing. Because when the mind understands the pattern, it no longer chases the source. And when chasing ends, space opens. Space for calm. Space for self-trust. Space for a connection that does not require you to disappear to be kept. What you are experiencing is not regression. It is recognition. But here's the shift, and this matters deeply. You are not here to diagnose them. You are here to understand yourself. Because healing doesn't begin by blaming. It begins by naming the wound. And once you can name it, you can stop carrying shame that was never yours. Stay with this process, because in the next part, you'll see why this pain lingers even after the relationship ends, and how your brain is still holding on to a pattern that can be gently, powerfully released. This is not the end of your capacity to love. This is the beginning of your capacity to love without losing yourself. Understanding the pattern brings awareness. Awareness creates distance. Distance allows choice. This stage is where most people struggle, not because they want to go back, but because letting go feels like betrayal of what they felt. Detaching from an avoidant bond does not mean turning cold. It means stopping the internal war. Many believe healing requires anger, that you must blame, label, erase. But hostility keeps the nervous system alert. It keeps the story alive. Peace comes from neutrality. The truth is simple, even if it hurts. Someone who avoids emotional closeness is not cruel by design. They are guarded by habit. Closeness triggers fear. Distance feels safe. This understanding changes how the memory lives inside you. Instead of replaying moments to find fault, clarity replaces confusion. You stop asking why you were not enough. You see that availability was limited long before you arrived. This is not about excusing behavior. It is about removing yourself from responsibility that never belonged to you. Trying to be understood by someone who retreats from feelings is exhausting. Explaining pain to someone who escapes discomfort only deepens it. At some point, you realize that silence is also an answer. The mind wants closure through conversation, but real closure comes through acceptance. Acceptance does not mean agreement. It means release. Release of the need to be seen by someone who could not look inward. Release of the urge to prove value. Release of waiting. Waiting is where energy leaks. The longer you wait, the more you postpone your own return. Here is the turning point. Detachment is not disappearance. It is redirection. Instead of focusing on what was missing, attention shifts to what was compromised. Your voice, your comfort, your steadiness. The body remembers tension. Even when the mind understands the past, muscles stay guarded. Breathing stays shallow. Thoughts stay alert. So healing becomes physical before it becomes emotional. You begin to slow down, not rush into understanding, not rush into forgiveness. Just slow down. You stop checking for signs. Stop reading meaning into silence. Stop assigning significance to memories that no longer need interpretation. Each pause teaches the system something new, that nothing bad happens when you stop chasing. This is where dignity returns, not through confrontation, through boundaries. Boundaries are not punishments. They are instructions to the nervous system. They say, I choose stability. They say, "I no longer negotiate my peace." Detaching without resentment requires maturity. It means recognizing that not everyone can meet you where you stand. Some people connect deeply, some connect selectively, some never learned how. Your job is not to teach them. Your job is to stop shrinking. When the urge to reach out appears, notice what it's asking for. Usually, it is not the person, it is reassurance, validation, familiarity. Those needs are real, but they do not require that source. This is how you regain control, by meeting your own needs directly, by choosing grounding instead of intensity, by choosing predictability instead of hope. Hope kept you alive inside uncertainty. Now safety replaces it. There will be moments of doubt, moments when memory softens the edges. That is normal. The brain remembers emotion before logic, so it romanticizes what felt intense. When that happens, return to facts, not stories, patterns. Patterns tell the truth without drama. Distance was consistent. Emotional access was limited. You adjusted. That is the reality. Seeing reality clearly is not bitterness. It is clarity, and clarity creates space for self-respect. Self-respect feels quiet, not urgent, not obsessive. It feels like standing still without fear of being left. This is the stage where you stop asking, "Why didn't it work?" and start asking, "What do I need now?" That question changes direction, because the future does not require you to harden your heart. It requires you to protect it. Detachment is not about closing yourself off. It is about opening toward consistency. And when consistency becomes the standard, chaos loses its pull. This is not the end of connection. It is the end of confusion. But here's the shift, and this matters deeply. You are not here to diagnose them. You are here to understand yourself, because healing doesn't begin by blaming. It begins by naming the wound. And once you can name it, you can stop carrying shame that was never yours. Stay with this process, because in the next part, you'll see why this pain lingers even after the relationship ends, and how your brain is still holding on to a pattern that can be gently, powerfully released. This is not the end of your capacity to love. This is the beginning of your capacity to love without losing yourself. When confusion ends, rebuilding begins. Not rebuilding the relationship, rebuilding yourself. This stage is quieter than pain, but it is stronger. After emotional instability, the system searches for familiarity, not excitement, not drama. Familiarity. That is why stillness can feel uncomfortable at first, because calm was not part of the old pattern. The body learned to stay alert, so peace feels empty before it feels safe. This is where real healing happens. You start choosing environments that don't require performance, people who don't make you guess, spaces where your presence is not questioned. Slowly, your inner rhythm changes. Your mind no longer scans for shifts. Your chest loosens. Your breathing deepens. This is the nervous system relearning trust. Trust does not come from words. It comes from repetition, from reliability, from emotional availability. And now, you are finally able to notice what you once ignored. Love that is healthy does not rush. It does not confuse. It does not test your patience to measure your worth. Healthy connection feels boring to a system used to emotional swings. That boredom is not lack of chemistry. It is absence of chaos. This is where many people self-sabotage. They mistake peace for emptiness, consistency for dullness. But calm is not empty, it is spacious. In that space, your identity returns. You start speaking without rehearsing, expressing without fear of withdrawal, wanting without guilt. You stop filtering yourself. That is the reward of healing, not perfection, authenticity. Your standards change naturally, not because you force them, but because your system refuses to go back. You no longer feel drawn to emotional distance. You notice it early, and instead of trying to fix it, You step away. That is growth. You understand now that attraction without emotional safety is incomplete. Connection without presence is unsustainable. You don't need intensity to feel alive anymore. You need alignment. Alignment feels grounding. It feels mutual. It feels predictable in the best way. You start choosing people who choose you back, not halfway, not later. Now. This is how self-trust forms. Every time you honor your needs, your confidence stabilizes. Not loud confidence, quiet certainty. You stop chasing explanations. You stop revisiting old chapters because you are busy building a new internal baseline. A baseline where your emotions are welcomed, where closeness does not trigger fear, where love feels like support, not effort. The past does not disappear, but it loses authority. It becomes information, not identity. You don't define yourself by who couldn't meet you. You define yourself by how you care for yourself now. And here is the most important shift of all. You realize that healing was never about them changing. It was about you returning to yourself, returning to your voice, your intuition, your sense of worth. That return is irreversible, because once the nervous system experiences safety, it remembers, and it seeks it again. This is how cycles end, not with confrontation, not with revenge, but with standards that no longer negotiate peace. You don't need to harden your heart. You just stop giving it to places that cannot hold it. The future you create from here will feel different, slower, steadier, more real. And when love arrives again, it won't feel like guessing. It won't feel like waiting. It will feel like recognition. Because healed love doesn't make you chase, it makes you stay present. This is what comes after confusion, after awareness, after release, not emptiness. Strength. That question changes direction, because the future does not require you to harden your heart. It requires you to protect it. Detachment is not about closing yourself off. It is about opening toward consistency. And when consistency becomes the standard, chaos loses its pull. This is not the end of connection. It is the end of confusion. But here's the shift, and this matters deeply. You are not here to diagnose them. You are here to understand yourself, because healing doesn't begin by blaming. It begins by naming the wound. And once you can name it, you can stop carrying shame that was never yours. Stay with this process, because in the next part, you'll see why this pain lingers even after the relationship ends, and how your brain is still holding on to a pattern that can be gently, powerfully released. This is not the end of your capacity to love. This is the beginning of your capacity to love without losing yourself.